Welcome to the episode 3 in my Workspace Redesign series. In this video, I'll show you how to quickly sketch a floor plan by hand when you don't have the exact dimensions. Whether you are moving into a new place, planning a redesign, or prepping for measurements, having a sketch of the floor plan is going to help you immensely in making better decisions. Because we don't have the measurements yet, we will sketch the floor plan using a technique called guesstimating. You will be guessing and estimating with your eye the proportion of various parts of the wall in relationship to each other. This is actually a very useful skill to develop for architects or planners because it teaches you to measure the objects around you with your eyes before you whip out the measuring tape. And the more you do it, and with a lot of practice, over the years, the better and more accurate your guesses become. To show you what we are working with, I want to give you a short tour of the room before we start sketching. On the left side, I'm going to show you the view of each wall, and on the right side, you see the sketch we are going to do today with an arrow pointing at the wall you are looking at. The room is rectangular, and I'm going to move clockwise to show you the view of each wall. The entryway is placed on the short side of the room, right in the center of the wall. These doors lead to the corridor. As we move to the wall on the right side, we have another set of double doors and a small window. On the following wall, opposite to the entryway, we see two symmetrically placed windows that shine a lot of light in the room. And our last wall is basically blank with a small protrusion in it. This is how the room looks like, so let's start sketching. I'm going to sketch on my iPad in an app called Procreate, but you can totally follow along with a pen and a piece of paper. The pens you will be using is perhaps something like this. There's a pencil for construction lines. For thicker lines, you might be using something like this, just a bit of a thicker marker. And in the end, I'll be adding some hatching. This is optional, but I'll be using something like this. I'm going to open my Procreate app and add in E4 standard piece of paper. This is something well known outside of the US. If you are in the USA, you'll probably be using something called a letter format. You can use a white piece of paper, but having a ruled piece of paper is going to make things a lot easier. So what I'm going to do is go to my wrench tool here and add drawing guide. Now, you can edit this drawing guide to make a grid in whatever format you want, but we're still in the beginning. I'm just going to use the grid that I'm being given here, whatever that is. Now, look around your room and try to assess the basic shape of the room. Most people are in some kind of rectangular room, and so is mine, but there are plenty of exceptions. Have a look around. If I look at my room, I can say that I'm in a rectangular room, but if I look a little closer at the length and the width of the room, then I can guess that the length is maybe just a little bit longer than the width. It's not drastically longer. I want to start my drawing with the construction lines. You can start with this pen using very thin lines. I'm just going to go to my Procreate brushes, go to sketching, and just use the Procreate pencil, which is fine. I also want to make sure that it's not very big, so it's a small size. In architecture drawing, it is rare that you make a drawing and the first line that you draw is the exact and perfect and the last one. What you do is you mostly draw a couple of lines where you guess that things are going to be, but you're not sure which one. I'm going to draw the rectangle of the contour of the room and start my way from the upper left corner, with the intention to draw the short side of the room on the short side of the page and the long side of the room on the long side of the page. I want to leave some space between the contour of my room and the edge of the paper in case I want to add some notes on my plan or for the thickness of the walls. I'm just going to use a color gray just to make the lines a little bit less strong. And I'm going to use a very thin pencil. So I'm going to start with the longer side of the room here And then the width, I'm probably gonna start at like maybe four or five, perhaps 5 lines here. And the reason for that is that I have a fairly thin wall here on this side, but a very thick one on this side. I'm just going to guess this wall here. And probably, because even if I don't know the thickness of my wall, I'm just going to give this wall another thickness here. I want to give 3 more rows here. And this is the width of my room. I want to count the squares here. I have 16 squares, which is great because it means that at 8 squares, I find the middle of my room, right? And if I know what the middle of my room is, then I know where my doors are, my double doors, which are in the center. And I also will probably find it easier to guess where my windows are because they too are symmetrical into the room. The grid helps me to draw straight lines, but it also helps me give dimensions to my room. I know my room is not a square, but a rectangle, so I'm making it slightly bigger than 16. But if I look at the width and length of my room, probably not by much, so I'm going to make it 20 squares. It feels proportionally right for me. I can also adjust it later. Six, 9, 12, 15, 16. So maybe here, 20. So this is what I'm guessing is my contour of the room. But I might be wrong, I might be pushing this later on back and forth, we shall see. It's also not a perfect science at the moment, we're just trying to estimate with our eyes. So now I have more or less the contour of the room, but my room is not perfectly straight on each side. My room is overhanging on the facade to extend the surface of my room. And this overhang is held together by 2 opposing pillars. So where do I mark this overhang? I have to look at this wall. If I look at it, I can see that my double doors are not exactly in the center. So I'm just gonna say perhaps 4 squares is the left side of the door. Perhaps the double doors are 5 squares. This side looks about as big, is a little bit bigger than the left side. Probably is not as big as the doors, but I'm just gonna say maybe 5 squares again. And then the left part is probably 5 or 6, possibly around the same size as this, but probably a little bit bigger. So I'm going to say that my overhang starts somewhere here. And I'm going to draw this vertical line because opposite to it there's a pillar that reflects this overhang. I'm going to push the edges of my overhang inside the room, but a square feels like too much. Probably half a square is enough. On the opposite side, it looks like it might be more, but not for the entire length of the overhang. I'm just guessing 2 squares. I may be wrong. It's just guesstimating. Right? So 2 squares like this. And this is my rough contour. Now you also might be interested in the thickness of the walls. For me, this wall is very thin, so I'm just going to add 1 square. And this wall is, for whatever reason, very, very thick here. And even though I don't know the centimeters, I'm just going to leave it at 3 squares. This one is probably 2 because it separates me from my neighbor and I can't hear anything, so it's at least a 2. I think this one is a 3 thickness because it has some shafts going through. So this is why it's maybe a little bit thicker, but this one is just a separating wall between 2 neighbors. And because I don't hear anything ever, I'm just assuming it's much, much thicker than this separation wall here. But it's just a guesstimation again. Now I want to mark the doors and windows. I know I have 2 double doors on this wall and they're exactly in the center. And because these doors here I said are 5 squares, and because usually doors are equal to each other, and I think mine are as well, I'm just going to make 2.5 squares here and 2.5 squares here to mark the 5 square doors as well. And here. And I'm also going to make a 2 squares wall here. It might be 3 actually because it's very, very thick, but just going to make 2. By the way, if you're wondering how come these walls are so thick, it's because I live in a very old house. Maybe has more than 100 years, and back then walls were very thick. The good part of Procreate is that no matter how wobbly your lines are, you can always make them straight. And now let's draw the windows. I already marked the center of my room here, and if I look closely, the windows and the line in the middle are not very different as size, or maybe because it looks like it might be a little bit smaller, so maybe 2.5, 1.5, or 1 3/4, and 1 3/4 here, and maybe the window stops here. And that's how we draw them symmetrically. The windows are equal to each other. They're also symmetrical to the center, somewhat. Now, usually windows are marked with 2 lines. So I'm just going to mark them like this with 2 lines. Even though technically they're kind of here as well, because I have double panes. And 1 row here. And there's another row here. One row here. And now we're gonna draw the doors, and the way you draw the doors is you draw them always open, because you need to know the surface that they're covering when they are open, so that you don't place any furniture or any important things in the way of the door. So this is why doors are often drawn as open. And because I said we have 2.5 squares, I'm just going to make the pane of the door 2.5 squares, 2.5 squares, and from the middle of I'm just going to do my best to make an arch. Of course, Procreate also helps me to do it perfectly. It's not quite what I was hoping for, but here we go. It's the same here. I make 2.5 squares for my door, 2.5 squares for my door. And now I want to do the contour of the wall. You can do it with a marker like this. I'm just going to pick a different type of pen here on Procreate. I go to the recent ones, let's see, what did I use? Maybe this one. What I do is I will add a different layer. So the sketch layer stays on its own layer, the construction lines layer stays on its own layer, and then I make another layer for the contour of the walls. And now I use this crayon. If you're using a pen and paper, you might use a sketch paper on top of it, or you would draw very, very careful. Let's see the thickness of this. It's maybe this thick. I'm just gonna go for the color black. Just to help me see the walls better. I want to turn around this iPad so badly, but I can't because you guys will not be able to see properly. So I just have to draw with my hand in angles that I'm not really comfortable with. But it will work fine, don't worry about it. And finally, I want to add a hatch. This is totally optional. You can also stay with this. I think this would be enough for doing a bit of sketching later on. But I like to hatch the walls just to have a better definition of my walls. You can use this type of marker. It's called Copic. You can use another marker. You can also use this pen to hatch whatever you want. This is a graphical choice, of course, but I am going to pick something called Copic Marker Chanel or Copic Mark. I'm not sure, one of these two, probably this one. And I'm going to go for a gray again, so probably this. What I do on my iPad is I'm going to select the area where I want the marker to go, so I don't go over edges. This is one advantage that you have for using Procreate, but of course you can also hatch very, very careful. So I'm just selecting my area. And then I'm also going to make another layer, just to be sure I'm not interfering with the other drawings. And now I just get to play and hatch. So I like to color the beginnings a little bit, the corners, to make them a little bit darker. This is just my own graphical input, but it doesn't have to be this. But since we are sketching, sketches can be beautiful, so why not? And this is how you sketch a plan without measurements. Once you have exported your sketch as a JPEG, you can print it on an A4 or a letter format. You can then add this A4 or letter format to a clipboard and use it to write down the measurements when you measure the room. We're gonna do more of this in the next video. Anyway, I hope you found this useful, and if you want to take a closer look at my drawing, either in Procreate format or JPEG, you can download it from the link in the description.